Welcome to the Ryan Frank Podcast. Ryan is a family man, first and foremost, but he's also a pastor, publisher, and serial entrepreneur. This podcast will help you think, work, and create like never before.
Hey friends, it's Ryan Frank, and welcome to the Ryan Frank Podcast. I am so grateful for your time and your attention today. Hey, if you don't have your tickets to the Kids Matter Conference, what are you waiting for? Get your tickets. We just announced a few weeks ago that Jordan Felice will be joining us at the Kids Matter Conference this year, along with a great lineup of main stage speakers, over 180 different specialized ministry breakouts, over 90 ministry partners with resources to help you in your ministry to kids and families. And it's all happening this fall, September 12th, 13th, and 14th. Learn more about the Kids Matter Conference at thekidsmatterconference.com. Make sure to put a Z in Kids Matter, thekidsmatterconference.com. The Kids Matter Conference is the event that you can't miss. You need to be there, and you need to bring your children's ministry team. You know, every once in a while you run into somebody and they're like, "What?" You're like, "Wow, I really like that person." And that person really makes connection with you. Well, about 20 years ago, I met someone named Byron Ragains. Byron Ragains, we met at a conference for children's ministry leaders. We had a conversation. And ever since, we have been great friends. And I am so excited to have Byron Ragains with us today on the Ryan Frank Podcast. If you have ever been to the Kids Matter Conference, I'm sure you've met Byron Ragains. If you've been in the children's ministry world a whole lot, you've met Byron Ragains. He's an active contributor to our I Love Kidmin Facebook community. He is a networker extraordinaire. He just loves people. And today, Byron and I are going to talk about the importance of inviting other people into your life and refusing to lead alone. God never intended for you to lead alone. He never intended for you to go through life and ministry by yourself. You need to do it with other people. And so I love today's conversation. We talked about the biblical framework for leading with others. We talked about the danger that you're going to be in if you go at life and ministry alone. And we talked about the power that comes with collaboration. We also wrap up the podcast by talking about a wonderful story in the Bible that Byron calls the Happy Meal story. I loved that. It was really a thought-provoking end of the podcast, and I can't wait for you to jump in and to listen in on this conversation. If you are listening to the podcast, I want to remind you that there is a YouTube version of the podcast. And if you're watching today on YouTube, I want to remind you that there is an audio version of the Ryan Frank Podcast. All of these links can be found at ryanfrank.com. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Let's get this show on the road. Byron, what's up? Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, Ryan, man. It's a privilege. It's snowing outside,
but
it's warm in the office. I got my candle going. I'm ready for a conversation, man.
You know, one thing about Byron and I, we have several things in common. We love pastors, we're networkers, and we both live in cold parts of the United States of America, don't we? North Central Indiana.
We've always talked about doing some kind of a network event over in Hawaii, and I don't know. Before I hang it up, I think we ought to do that.
Yeah, you know, ever since I met Byron, I said, "Byron, why don't you invite me to one of your networking events?" And you always tell me the invite's in the mail, and it never shows up.
Hey, speaking of that, my wife, Ryan, was telling me this morning, I think the postage stamp, is it like 65 cents now? Do you believe that?
It's crazy.
It's amazing.
It's crazy. You probably remember when it was, I feel like I remember when it was 20 cents or 25 cents.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, man. Oh, yeah, for sure. So, at that kind of price for a stamp, I can't mail you any letters anymore. I got to email you, okay?
So those email invites they've probably been going to my junk mail or spam all these years. I'm so sorry, Byron.
That's right.
So Byron, you've been with David C. Cook now for 62 years. 40, right?
It's really interesting. It's really interesting, Ryan. If I survive the next month,
Yeah,
on February 28th, it'll be 40 years
40
that
years.
I have been a David C. Cook.
That is so
And I
neat.
was telling someone, a young leader, the other day, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I'm 35." So I mean, to think that I've been doing this long, and I haven't been on with you in such a good while, but
Yeah.
behind me, that is David C. Cook III's office door.
You got to be
So
kidding me.
when you think of the incredible
How
men and
neat.
women of our craft that have gone past this door into his office back in the day to talk Christian education. We don't call it that today, but that's what was talked about behind that door by some incredible women and men that we're still doing ministry on top of our shoulders. So yeah, it's been a while. It's been a good run.
Man, that congratulations are in order.
Thank you.
And how neat
Thank
on
you.
that. How neat on that door.
Yeah.
How did you get that door? I'm curious.
So a part, for our guest, David C. Cook, you'll see some even old curriculum here.
Yes.
David C. Cook began with D.L. Moody downtown Chicago. The Chicago fire burned us out, so we came out to Elgin. David C. Cook, too, built a state-of-the-art facility like
Yep.
Don Quixote well before his time.
Mm-hmm.
And just over time, as many people know, our corporate office is in Colorado Springs, but our warehouse remains in Elgin. So we had to, just because of the facility not being up to code, they actually got rid of the executive wing at David C. Cook and Elgin, which was actually on the historic, what do you call it, documents or whatever.
Okay.
So it was
Yeah.
kind of a complicated mess. So a very, very hot day 2 years ago in Chicago, I by myself went up the stairs. This is a 10-foot solid oak custom door. There was nothing fancy about David C. Cook 1, 2, 3. I knew them all. Well, no, I didn't know them all. I knew David C. Cook 3.
Okay.
But there was nothing fancy about the building in Elgin at all. But this is pretty decorative, tricked out with beautiful brass. But I bounced that down the stairs and into our SUV. And by the time I was done, I was totally drenched with sweat because of August. But I knew, Ryan, if I didn't get the door, which was given to me, I knew that it would be gone and never seen before. So I love history.
How neat.
I've got, in fact, right here, Ron Hunter, our friend Ron Hunter, sent this to me. This is our comprehensive Bible study curriculum, 4.5 cents. And the date on this is 1927.
Oh my word.
It's meant, but we talk about copy, right? We talk about curriculum.
Yeah.
We talk about books that we write and we read. We're like, hey, that's really heavy content, heavy copy. Look at all that copy there. And this thing is just loaded with copy. And that's so much the way we used to teach, right? Just give them the content, man. Just load them up with the copy. And it's certainly a different day.
Isn't that something? Sure. And now, I mean, to the polar opposite, I mean, there's curriculums out there that are nothing but flashy. And then the copy is just so small.
It's true.
Byron, when you started at Cook, did you think as a young man, I'm going to be a lifer here? Like, this isn't really a place where I would like to give a good amount of my life? Or did it start as you didn't know? Tell us your story. We weren't planning on talking about this, but I'm intrigued.
Again, it's so good to be with you and talk leadership with you. Yeah. I greatly respect you, and I've seen you grow up from a young kid to be a prolific leader in our field. I am the recipient of a Southern Baptist pastor's home. Mommy and dad are both in heaven. My dad's mega church was about 30 people on Christmas or Easter. My mother played the piano. and not well, not good, really bad, but she's playing it really good now in heaven. And I felt called to ministry when I was young, about 10 or 11, and um, ended up at a small American Baptist college, Judson College, now University in Elgin,
Okay.
and started kind of doing some work with Cook on the side back in the day, promoting and talking about the old picture Bible, which is the forerunner for the best-selling Action Bible.
Okay.
And I kind of happened into this career at David C. Cook. I don't think I happened into it. I think God directed, as he does your steps, he directed mine to David C. Cook. And I guess I didn't know then what I know now, and I didn't know if this would be a place where I would be for 40 years. But I felt called to ministry, and I felt this could be the calling. It might not be local church work, but like you, it really is kingdom work where I'm traveling the country and I'm working with hundreds and hundreds of churches and leaders. So. And there were several veterans that I worked with, back in the day when I started in 1983. I mean, Press was huge, Standard was huge, Gospel Light was huge, Bible and Life, David C. Cook was huge. Yep. The denominational houses, Nazarene, Southern Baptist, they were huge, and we had close to 14 reps that covered the country. And these were big hitters, big leaguers. And I just looked up to them. And I thought, at a young guy, 21, 22, how am I ever going to know everything they know? How am I ever going to know the people they know? And now I look back and I'm so grateful that I think the Lord just said, go. Just go, be you. I use this all the time with people like yourself or young leaders. Just go be you, Ryan. If you go be Ryan, the world, and specifically children's ministry as we know it, will be so much better. And so I did that hard work of just going out and meeting people. And, I'm a people person, and it came relatively easy. And now I look back and, there's people that I have poured into. Some of them are in heaven right now. A number of them are still busy at the work, and still there's been a lot of turnover, COVID and so on. So I never thought, man, I would be here 40 years. But young people for sure, will ask me, and they're younger than you, Ryan Frank.
Yep, I believe it.
They'll ask me, B-Dog, how have you stayed so long? Especially this young generation, so used to moving around, right? About every 3-4 years.
Yeah.
And I just said, I have learned to really roll with it and roll with the changes. And there's been significant changes at David C. Cook. There's been significant changes in our field. Think about it. When I began 40 years ago, Starbucks was barely, there were no computers. There was no cell phone. It is amazing how things have just changed over the time. But man, the people that I have met with and been with all over the country, look, for a guy from Southern Illinois, born in Metropolis, the home of Superman, which is the very tip of Illinois, I've had the greatest run of all by being able to see the country, see parts of the world, and pour into people what I believe God has asked me to do, and that is just to love volunteers and staff and workers who are trying to shape this next generation. Without these people in our churches, I mean, you and I, we don't really have a lot, but we work with some incredible people.
100%, 100%. You are such, you said it yourself a minute ago, that you are a people person. You're a people person, extraordinaire. I mean, you really are just a great networker and such an encouragement. Have you always been like that, Byron? Like as a kid and stuff, did you find yourself just being a social type person?
No, what's really weird? I mean, I think growing up, I was more of a introvert. And then probably in my junior, senior year, things really opened up with me athletically, socially, went to school, went to college, and kept developing. And I think I really found my groove. I tell people today, look, I'm not that smart. I just know a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you would expect me to be smarter at 61 and having been in this field for 40 years. Yeah. But I tell people I'm not that smart. I just know a lot of people, and I should after 40 years. But I love people. My dad was one who, in fact, we just celebrated his life and death. He's been gone for a number of years, but his birthday was this past week on the 24th. And I shared with my brothers, my dad was a guy that just loved people. He was a good teacher. He was a good pastor. He was a good preacher. He was a good shepherd. He just loved people. He loved the underdog. He loved the marginalized. And I have just tried to treat ministry leaders as I see you, I'm present with you, you're my best friend. And when you start stitching all these relationships together, it's wonderful. And I remember, and I think, for our listeners, when I began years ago, I had a fellow rep from, I think, Scripture Press tell me, and it kind of offended me.
Yeah.
And he said, you're going to find out as a rep for a large publishing house, David C. Cook, you can't be everyone's best friend. You just can't. And I thought, no, that's not true. I am going to be everyone's best friend. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm recognized in this space as a friend of a lot of friends. So
yes,
I love the networking part, and it really plays well into what I'm doing. And I think for our listeners, and there are a number of people who are introverts, and there are a few who are extroverts. Mm-hmm. I think the beautiful thing about networking is you get beyond yourself and you meet other people, and you begin to create conversations with other people. And sometimes you just kind of take yourself out of that conversation. But what you did, if it weren't for Ryan Frank, those conversations would not have happened. You were the conduit. If it weren't for me, those conversations, and sometimes we don't know where those conversations go, Ryan. I mean, that's the supernatural, beautiful, spiritual part of our work.
Yeah.
And for the listeners there, it's important for you to network. It's important for you to get out of your office. It's important to go across town and meet some other ministry leaders who are doing similar work. Learn from them. Learn, ask the question how and why and all that kind of thing. And I've tried to do that over my career. So yeah, it has come very, very natural to me. And as you know, we've just come out with a new curriculum called Wonder Inc. And so much of what I do with that, Ryan, is just talk with people, then say, Bill, I want you to talk with Tiffany Mills in Kansas City. She's been using this stuff for a couple of months now. And let me just pass her on to you, and you have a conversation as a ministry leader with a ministry leader. So it comes natural. I love connecting people.
I love it. Byron, what would you say to, and I want to come back to the new curriculum, but what would you say to someone? I'm sure we have some listeners out there that are like,
sure.
Yeah, you know what, Byron and Ryan, you guys you're not afraid to hold a microphone. You're not afraid to talk to people. You're more extroverted. What would you say to the introvert out there? Because I'm convinced that, especially for ministry leaders, and Byron, I think you'd agree with me, if the devil can get us lonely, he's got us in a good spot. And I think a lot of times lonely people, it might be easy to just chalk that up to, well, I'm introverted. I'm introverted. I'm introverted. Yeah. What would you say to the introvert out there that both you and I mean, we are very empathetic toward those of you that are introverts by
Yeah.
nature, but
Yeah.
is there hope for the introvert? I guess is what I'm asking.
I hope so. If not, they probably turn this podcast off.
Exactly. They're hitting that unsubscribe button fast.
Ryan, Frank, I thought a lot about this part of our chat today.
Yeah.
I think the beautiful thing for ministry leaders, whether you be a people person, extrovert or introvert, but in answering your question, that person that has a difficult time incorporating other people into his or her ministry,
Mm-hmm.
therefore they're doing it lonely. I don't believe Jesus had that in mind. If you look at him, he wasn't a bad teacher. He was a pretty good professor,
Mm-hmm.
had a number of degrees. He could do ministry alone, but he often did ministry with his homies, with his disciples, with his guys. And was he an introvert? Was he an extrovert? He was Jesus. He was everything. But I think for our listeners, what I would challenge you, because I know when I'm holding a meeting, and you can kind of look out there and see who's an extrovert, who is comfortable in picking up the phone and calling Ryan Frank and saying, "Hey, I'm brand new to children's ministry. Is there any way?" Somebody said you were pretty sharp at what you do. Can I get on your calendar and grab 30 minutes of coffee and ask you there's there's more people who are very uncomfortable doing that. And my word is, again, God the Father has not called us into doing ministry alone.
Yeah.
And I always say a team is more than one. And so for that listener out there who's kind of on an island, kind of doing the work, but and I think with COVID has not helped this. With technology, it does help us a bit, where we can Zoom and we can connect with people from not only across town but across the world and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I would challenge our listeners, just be uncomfortable. And I think the beautiful thing about you, Ryan, and I've had a first row seat. I've learned and watched you develop your skill, your craft, your trade. Mm. And if a young ministry leader is listening now and he or she just is either fearful or fearful of failure or fearful of being vulnerable or insecure, or you want to control your ministry, I want to challenge you to step out of that, because there are people like Ryan Franks and myself and other ministry leaders around the corner who would love to sit with you and help you over some speed bumps that might be appearing in your ministry. So yeah, it's going to take some self-reflection for those out there that just say, "Hey, I want to go it alone." Go for it. But I think ministry is beautiful when we do it together. This is beautiful what you and I are doing here, talking, having a conversation that's going to the greater children's and family ministry world. So I don't go it alone, man. Don't go it alone.
I love what you said, mentioning Jesus, because if Jesus, the Son of God, chose not to do it alone, and we talk a lot about his triangle, right? I don't know if it's his triangle, but when I'm teaching on this, how you've got, he had the crowd down here, and then, there were the 70 that he sent out, and then he had his 12. Yeah. At the very top, he had that inner circle of 3, and he relied on them. He prayed with them. He was close to them. And if Jesus needed that leader out there, whether you're leading in the ministry or the marketplace, whether you're new or you're like Byron, and you've been here for 40 years. You need people, and you've got to be self-aware, like you just said, Byron. And then for some of you, you might just need to make the decision that, I'm not going to go at this alone. Yes, I might be more comfortable by default. I might just want to be by myself, but I'm not going to put myself in that situation. I'm going to decide to not go at this alone. Byron, you've made that decision, didn't you?
Yeah, I really did. And I want to share too with our guests. My, Ryan, you've been to my church. It did you good to be in a Baptist church years ago. I think you completely forgot that experience, but I've not. Anyhow,
yeah, I got a lot of the Holy Spirit in that Baptist church.
There you go. There you go.
Yep.
My wife is on staff at our church in women's ministry, and just in the last, Ryan, 4 months, a new leader has come on to lead her and team. Our women's ministry is a huge port of entry. Most people coming into our church are coming through that portal of women's ministry. It's incredible how it's brought in men, the fathers. It's brought in the children, right? It's worked. Our previous leader did a beautiful job. So our new leader comes in, and there's a lot of angst. My wife was most anxious about that. I mean, how can I let this leader go who we did ministry together, never alone. Now a new leader, we got to start all over.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about this new leader is she has done a really great job assembling the right people around her. So I think that is very, very important. And I know, again, Ryan, you and I come from small churches back in the day. The majority of our leaders are from small churches.
100%.
A team of 2 is fine. A team of 3 is fine. I'm just saying a team needs to be more than 1. Yeah. That is a lone ranger. And that's really what Ryan and I are calling you out of. So Kim really assembled and reassembled a really good team. And all of them, whether it be logistics, whether it be ops, whether it be strategy, whether it be programming, all of these ladies have their lane they run in, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got Kim, who's the visionary, right? Mm-hmm. She's you and me, quiet, laid back, easygoing, but knows where they're going, has the right people. But here's what she's done that's just been beautiful. She met with all the ladies. She met with my wife. And she went about the meeting as my wife described it to me. It wasn't about what do you see the women's ministry looking like at Chapel Street Church in the next year. Mm-hmm. It wasn't who should we bring in from the stable and the dock of women's authors and speakers that could speak to our conferences. The question from an incredible leader who's not doing ministry alone, but with 6 women, which in essence is her small group and her church, she basically said, Jackie, how do I need to help you grow, be discipled in your faith? Now, this is my wife's a woman who has known Jesus for a long time. All right. This is not a rookie believer. Yep. And Jackie was kind of taken back, like, oh my gosh, it's been a while since somebody really asked me that question. And she said, I need to really improve my prayer life. And so this is where Kim, the women's ministry leader, has camped out with my wife as she's camping out with these other women. Because what she has seen, and I want our listeners to see this, the end game is not necessarily to have the greatest women's ministry in Chicagoland. Yep. The end game is not necessarily to have the greatest children's ministry in Marion, Indiana, or Picayune, Mississippi, or Madison, Wisconsin. Yep. I think for our leaders out there, as you're leading your team, your ultimate mission, job, I think what God is calling you to do is help that team of 2 help that team of 3,
Man.
help that team of 4 or 5 love Jesus and to grow as disciples. And all the other stuff will take care of itself.
It will.
But the fact that Kim has said, Jackie, you have been here a long time, 25 years. Okay. So, I mean, it's like, Ryan, when there is a historical question, they go to Jackie. At Cook, they often come to me. I've got the context. But Kim is saying the women's ministry piece is not the most important piece with you. It's, I want you to fall in love with Jesus more today than you did yesterday. And that's, I really want our listeners to hear that, because that takes away from this doing ministry alone, but you're actually a shepherd, right? And I think
so good.
I think in this, I don't know if it's post-pandemic or not. I don't know where we're at with this whole COVID thing, but COVID has done a number on all of us. I'll be long and gone, and you'll be still hanging on, probably. No telling what you'll be doing then, you dreamer, you.
Yeah.
But I think the more our big churches can become smaller and more conversational, relational, transparent, intimate, close. Look, we have done ministry for so many years now outside of 6 feet.
No doubt.
Church ministry was always done within 6 feet, always. And so for 2.5 years, we've done it outside. It's time for us to come together. And that's really what Kim is doing, is just really bringing these women together as our children's ministry leaders. You just need to bring your people together, be with your people, talk, hug, be in conversation, do all that kind of stuff. So important.
Byron, thanks for sharing that story. When I was researching my new book, Friends in Real Life, I spent a lot of time in the book of Acts looking at the early church and the model of the early church and what did community look like. And I love what you just said, because, the idea back in the early church, the idea of going into a big auditorium on Sundays and staring at the back of people's head, sitting in rows, listening to the same person teach every week, and that's church. That would have been foreign to them. Church was so much more personal and so much more small group, so much more conversational, communal, eating together, breaking the bread together. And boy, as much as I love worshiping in a large group of people at church, I'm just afraid that, we're missing out on that part of community, and we can all be a part of these big churches and go home and feel alone all week. I mean, I hear it all the time. I've experienced it. I'm sure you've heard it as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think even our children, again, I know some of our listeners, they're working with children's ministries with hundreds and hundreds of kids and hundreds of volunteers. I mean, how do we help that large children's ministry have that small, intimate feel where you're known, you're seen, you're recognized? I mean, that is very, very difficult for us to do. I mean, there are so many days. I mean, I was just talking to a church in Arkansas this week. They got 2,000 kids on a weekend. Part of me is like, oh my gosh, that'd be so awesome to lead a ministry, multi-campus that size. But then a part of me, and what I've really been hearing from a lot of veteran ministry leaders post-pandemic is some of them are like, I'm kind of done with this big church thing. I want to find a church with like 50 kids and go back to doing what I did when I was 21 years old. And that was, I did children's ministry. Some of us in big churches, you're overseeing, you're not partaking, you're not involved, you're not engaged. It's still a beautiful thing that you're overseeing hundreds of volunteers or a lot of volunteers, many classes, many family units, but you're not in that day to day. And I think for me, if I were to hop off the horse, I would be very intrigued in going to a small, medium-sized church, making that ministry where everyone is seen, recognize. That could be a fun chapter. Who knows?
It would be, who knows? I
Who
think,
knows?
I think you're exactly right. Byron, let's shift gears just a little bit and let's
Sure.
talk about, we've talked a little bit about the need for other people. The Lord, Byron, you said it, the Lord never intended for you to do life and ministry alone.
Yeah.
If the enemy can get us lonely and by ourselves, he's got us in a good spot. We need other people. We need to be self-aware enough to recognize that we need others. We need to invite other people into your life, whether you're introverted or extroverted. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how not leading alone will not only make a positive impact on me, but on my church, my work, my business, my organization. And I think if there's anybody that's had a front row to this lately, it's been Byron Ragains and the team at Cook with the launch of this new Wonder Inc. curriculum. I remember a couple of years back, maybe it's been 2 years, you called me and said, Ryan, we're working on something. This is going to be really neat. And you bounced a few things off of me. One thing I have noticed watching, and of course, our ministries are such great partners through the year, is that when David C. Cook decided that we were going to launch a major new initiative, it did not just come out of the cubicles of an office space somewhere, but it really is the result of true collaboration from a bunch of people in different spots. We talk through that with us.
Yeah, that's good. And I want to pause for a moment before I go there, as we're talking about just surrounding yourself with people and the right people. I have come across social media several times from you, and I think it's a good push that you send out. And it's something like, make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who are positive, who not necessarily think exactly like you, but on some of the major issues they do. But it was so, and that's really good for our listeners, and it's good for me to see that, because it is important for us to surround. It's important for us not to do ministry alone,
100%.
And it's also very important for us to surround ourselves with people who are going to uplift us, encourage us, and make us better. So I speak for the listeners. I'm grateful, and I would like to ask you, why is that on your radar, and why do I see that come through every once in a while? Why?
I think a lot of that. Thank you, Byron. I think a lot of that comes from my pastor's heart first and foremost, and then just my desire. I chose several years ago that by God's help, I'm just going to speak life over people, and I'm going to speak good things. And if you give me a call and you share with me some vision God's put on your heart, I'm going to speak life over that vision, and I'm going to support it however I can. And I've seen the impact that those words of life have had over me, over my wife Beth, over our children, and I want to be that for other people. So I want to encourage other people. And here's the thing, Byron, for all of us, this is all through the pages of the scripture, especially in Proverbs, but we see examples of it all through the scripture. And we see examples of it in our lives where we are going to be like the people that we're listening to and that we're close to. And we're the people that you listen to, they're either going to lift you up or they're going to push you down. They're either going to help you dream bigger, or they're going to help you just be satisfied with status quo, or live with a feeling that I don't have what it takes. I can't measure up.
Or serve lonely, right? Serve all by yourself.
Totally.
Going the lone route. Yeah.
For real. So I've decided I'm going to love everybody and I'm going to be friendly to everybody, but I'm not going to hang around negative people. I'm not going to listen to negative people. Life's too short. God's put too big of a vision and a mission on my life and yours. You've got to make sure that you're allowing the right inputs into your life. And Byron, thanks for sharing that word of encouragement. Yeah. You're that for me as well. You're always such an encouragement and inspiration.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's good for our listeners to hear from their host why it's important for us not to surround ourselves with negativity. Yes. Negativity is extremely toxic. It is a drainer, and there's enough of that junk going around post-COVID. So surrounding ourselves with, and it's not like we're walking around with rose-tinted glasses either. But
no, not at all.
And it's easy to get sucked into a group of people who are being extremely negative. It's an awkward feeling, but the more we can keep ourselves away from that is very, very good. So I appreciate you having that posture with our community. So I think really, I think collaboration, I can't spell it, but I think when I started years and years ago at Cook, I don't know if we talked much about it, but I think collaborative learning, collaborative experiences is beautiful, and it goes along or in tandem with this networking concept that I have tried to really adopt. And I think, again, for our listeners, the collaboration, I'm starting to do these. They're called Coffee and Conversations. And I had one in Dallas, Fort Worth the other day. And I think there's a lot of programming and meetings and formal stuff, and all that is important. And we have those, as you do as well, with Kids Matter and MegaCon and all that. But I think so many of our leaders, they, especially again, post-pandemic, they just want to be together. And they really want somebody to organize it. So I came into Dallas and I just said, hey, we're going to do coffee conversations. I thought maybe 10 people would show up. 50 showed up for
you gotta be
coffee.
kidding.
And Wow. So I'm going to start doing these around the country, because I think I know where the people are, and let's bring them together, and let's just have organic, free-flowing, no heavy programming. Let's just be together.
Yep.
And I think what I saw in Dallas and what I'll see in the Twin Cities here in a couple of weeks is collaboration. And when you get a room full of children's and family ministry leaders, the idea sharing, the best practices, the me being honest and you being honest and saying, I really failed at this, but I learned these 2 or 3 things and I won't do it again. And when I do, I'll do it differently. So I think, when you look at this new project of David C. Cook, very excited about it. Wonder Inc. came out this past June. And it's a collaborative work. We did a ton of research with several organizations that really helped us understand the family today, the church today, especially coming out of COVID. But then I think where this has really gotten good, and I was on the phone talking to a church today that's considering this as an option. And I said, the beautiful thing about David C. Cook and Wonder Inc. is Wonder Inc. really is a resource that has been built by the people for the people. So I think when I started at Cook years ago, we had this silo called curriculum publishing, and it was all done in Elgin, and it was done in Colorado Springs. Now this Wonder Inc. thing really is being done by practitioners from around the country. So the collaboration that goes into forming is a beautiful thing. So it's an exciting project. It's picking up more momentum every day. We have churches of all sizes using it, but it really is the real vibe, tone, tenor of Wonder Inc. is really helping children understand who God is and who he made them and how he created them to be, versus what the world is teaching and broadcasting and amplifying. Counterculture as to what your girls are hearing from culture. We want the Frank girls to hear with Wonder Inc. that God loves you, God knows you, God sees you, God's for you, God sent his son Christ for you. The Holy Spirit is there for you. Therefore, you're a child of God. So we're excited about what's happening with Wonder Inc. for sure.
I love your heart behind it, because there's no doubt. I mean, we are all adults alike, adults and kids alike, but I think especially kids. I mean, they really are dealing with some major identity crisis stuff.
They are. They are.
And it's true for all of us as we flip through these phones and social media and we start comparing ourselves to each other and finding our value and our presence and our number of followers and the way we look compared to how somebody else looks. And if it's hard for us as adults, to process this and to keep our identity straight as we understand who we are in God's eyes, how much harder is it for these kids in this world that they're growing up in? Byron, I'm curious, I'm going to take a little rabbit trail for a second on the curriculum, because I know we have a lot of ministry leaders that are watching or listening to the podcast. Beyond the message of, hey, here is who God is and here's who you are. Are there any other things that come to mind that makes Wonder Inc. a unique curriculum or different, or, hey, we're check this out because of this or this? Maybe something that's baked into the curriculum that you think is worth noting to.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah. And I think looking back at one of the breakouts that I and one of my teammates, Courtney Weaver, who is a very, very gifted communicator,
yes, she is,
out of Cincinnati, Ohio, that's on our team. She and I did a breakout entitled "Speaking a Blessing and Declaring Truth Over Children," and it was well attended, as all of our workshops were this past MegaCon. And just to our listeners, if you've not come to MegaCon, I'll see you at MegaCon 2024. But I would say that it's something I heard from a church again this week that said, what I really like about Wonder Inc. is this thing called the blessing and declaration. I said, break that down for me. And he did beautifully, better than I could. And I think there is a posture that we take with Wonder Inc. in every lesson where we invite volunteers to speak a blessing over their children. I think there is, you look through the Gospels, you look through John Trent's book, The Blessing, which is still out there. It's very powerful. Words matter, right?
Yep.
Words matter. And I think our kids are hearing so much garbage, so much bad stuff. What would it look like in your children's ministry if kids heard every Sunday their volunteers speaking a blessing? May the Lord who created you love you this week. May you know that he's near you. He's going to be with you on the bus, down the hallway, by your all that. Speaking a blessing. Very simple, very powerful. And then the other posture is declaring truth in God statements. God is worthy. God is holy. God is for me. God sees me. These are powerful truths that go against culture. And so if we have a fighting chance, and we do, I mean, we know how the story ends, but we're in for a fight, bro.
Yeah, we are.
That's why your conference is critical.
Yep.
That's why your conference is important. That's why more volunteers need to be a part of a conference community like a MegaCon, to be there, to be encouraged, to leave, to pick up the armor and go back into this fight. The world is polluting our kids with toxic messaging. Everybody knows this is true. Yep. Do I want my kids on a Sunday morning? Do I want Jackson, my 7-year-old grandson, to hear a Bible story? Without a doubt. I mean, the Bible, it's the greatest book of all time. It's not the Action Bible. It's the Holy Bible. It's a great one. But do I also love the idea that he's hearing at his church every Sunday a teacher, a volunteer speaking a blessing over him and then declaring truth in front of him. He hears that. He responds to that, tells me, gee, Paul, this is what the blessing was. This is what the declaring or declaration was. This is all hemmed in this thing we call Wonder Inc. Then what would it be like, Ryan, for us to move this from the church house to the house, and parents, before they put their child to bed at night, speak a blessing over their child? What about the child before he or she goes to school? They speak just a word of declaration before they hit the bus. Our kids need, and you talked about the enemy getting in the ears and the minds of our leaders and saying, you don't need to network, you don't need to collaborate, you don't need to go across town, you don't need to go to this conference, just steady ship, do ministry alone. That's lies from hell right there. And we need to offset these lies too with truth and blessings. I would say that's the very heartbeat of this thing called Wonder Inc. It's beautiful. It really is.
Good. And yeah, I'm resonating with what you're saying on so much of that. And those words of blessings, I mean, those can literally change the trajectory of somebody's life.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Byron, we're going to have to part two this because there is so much more I want to talk about today. But let me wrap up with two questions. Number one, I'd love to hear from you. This is random. What's your favorite Bible story? You love God's word. Favorite Bible story.
I love it. In fact, I wish we had more time on this. It's John 6, Ryan. John 6. I call it the Happy Meal. I think it's incredible when you think that Jesus worked with this young child and hundreds of hungry people and crazy disciples who walked with Christ but were clueless to a large degree, and they happened to be guys.
Yeah.
Jesus uses this little kid with a bag of dead fish, and I can only imagine the stench and some Wonder Bread, which it's not wonderful at all.
Not at all.
And he takes that and he blesses and he feeds, and there's so much food left over. But I wonder, when I get to heaven, why this is my favorite story.
Yeah.
When I get to heaven, I want to find that little boy. I want to find that little boy. And I just want to say, can I have a half hour of your time? I want you to tell me that story firsthand. What was it like? And what was it like experiencing that? And what was it like for you to give what you had away? And then what was it like to live for Christ the rest of your life? Oh my gosh, that's my favorite. John 6, man, Happy Meal.
I've never, we all know the story, and I love that, the Happy Meal, but I've never thought about that before. Think about the rest of that kid's life. I mean, how could he ever, that had to change the course of his life.
You talk about Hollywood making a movie.
Oh.
That is a movie right there. Imagine in epic proportions, because Scripture says there were a lot of people there. They were hungry.
Yeah.
He had little, but boy, Christ magnified that and multiplied that. Blown away. That would be a blockbuster movie, or at least a chapter to a movie for sure.
Man, okay. Yeah. Then my second question, and maybe you've already talked about it, because I know you're working on these coffee conversations, which are great. Yeah. That's a genius idea, and I love that. I love how you pour into these ministry leaders. What's something, I always like to end the podcast by asking who I'm interviewing, something big that you're working on right now. So Byron, what's something big that Byron Ragains is working on right now?
Well, it would be Wonder Inc. for sure. I'm very involved in our team there, networking, collaborating, connecting churches with other churches that are experiencing Wonder Inc. right now. Yeah. I think it would be coffee and conversations, which I'd love to do one of those with you, Ryan.
I would
Maybe
too.
You and I, we go to Dallas and we do it together. Let's really dream about you and I doing some things. If we're going to talk about collaboration,
let's do it. 100%.
We need to do it, right? 100%. I think in all that I do, I'll end with this if I could. I think all that I do is to remind Ryan Frank, Beth Frank, ministry leaders that I encounter, keep drinking from the right well. And I heard this story from Duncan at Raise Up Faith at MegaCon. I'll give him credit. We were talking about pouring into people and reminding them to drink the good water, the gospel water, the Jesus water.
Amen.
The water that never is polluted, the water that never runs out, the water that always tastes good. He said, I'll tell you a story. There was a pastor of a church in Nashville that, for whatever reason, said, I just need some time away. And he hopped on a plane. He went to Australia. And he had something to do with cattle and livestock back over this way in Tennessee as well. And when he got to Australia, he began traveling the countryside, and he noticed great flocks, I don't think that's the word, great herds of cattle were roaming with no fences. And he paused and he surveyed the acreage, and he's like, my goodness, there's no fences. And he remembered back in Tennessee, you had always herd or pen or cattle your cows with fences.
Yeah.
So we began to ask the Australians, and the Australians said, you don't need fences. If you dig a really good well and you put it right in the center of the pasture.
Wow.
Because the cattle will just hover there and keep drinking.
Man, that's so good.
Do we need fences? For sure. Do we need boundaries? I do. But I believe when we're drinking from the right well, the right water, maybe fences aren't as important as they have been. So that's something that I'm trying to remind people all the time. Ryan, this has been great. Thanks.
Byron, what a great story, and what a great ending to our conversation. And a great reminder. Make sure you're drinking from that water. Right. Make sure that you are connected to other leaders. Don't go at life and ministry alone. If Byron or I can serve you, please reach out to us and let us know. Byron, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your dedication to the Lord and his church. And thank you for being my friend. I appreciate you being on the podcast with us today.
And fantastic. See you again. Bye now.
This episode of the Ryan Frank podcast has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more conversations to help you stay on the leading edge. And if you like what you've heard, please rate this podcast with 5 stars. Thanks so much, and we will talk to you next time.